You got to know the ways that things break in order to prevent them from breaking. Or in order to diagnose them when they are broken. So that's hard because you got to know that. And I think it's important to think a little bit about how we go about setting things up, setting up tracking, setting up data collection in the marketing world, and maybe even how that compares a little bit to other industries or other practices that deal with data collection.
My name's Adam Collings. Welcome to AdMind Analytics. I'm here with Mike Query, our founding engineer. Mike, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?
Dude, breakfast free this morning.
All right. Well, we're going to have all of your body's energy should be able to focus then on all these questions. Okay, today we're talking about data accuracy. So let's just get right into it. What does it mean in the context, when we talk about data accuracy, what does it mean in the context of leveling up your analytics?
So let's talk about, let's just frame up where we're talking about data accuracy, because we're thinking about marketing analytics. So the tools that we're talking about accuracy in are first and foremost your web analytics system. That's the core of your analytics. But it's also its relation, the data in that system's relation to what's either in your back end, like your primary business store, like your CRM or your e-commerce back end, and also in relation to other marketing systems. So ads platform or email platform or Google Search Console. So SEO tools, things like that.
And we're trying to get them all to line up.
Yeah. It's about accuracy, and it's not about one system's accuracy. Often it's about the relationship between systems.
With what we see here at AdMind, I would, as with my marketing background, I would think that people would be most concerned, or at least my concern was always making sure that the ad conversion count lined up with those other system counts down the funnel for my business, whether that was Salesforce or some accounting software or in a Shopify environment or whatever else that is. And so what we're talking about is making sure that those numbers
line up,
are aligned.
They're accurate, and also there's a component of accuracy that's you trust the accuracy. You and your teams trust it, because you can be accurate but be doubting and still be in an awful position.
Sure.
So it's about having it accurate and then trusting it. And you could also be in the reverse position that's like you trust it but it's inaccurate, and so you're making screwy decisions.
Right.
So
okay. So why is that so hard to accomplish?
Well, I think before we even talk about that, let's level set on what's technically acceptable for accuracy, because in the marketing world, it's not going to be the same as like the banking world. Like banking, it's like we've got to have every penny correctly accounted for in everybody's accounts, or we're going to have mayhem. And in the marketing world, we're never going to get there. We don't have that. We don't have the technical capability to get that accurate. So it's like there's first a question of what is acceptable accuracy. And I think there's a few things that are like technically acceptable inaccuracy, and then technically unacceptable inaccuracy. So usually your systems are going to underreport actuality by some margin, because there are acceptable reasons why you'll miss data. Some people are going to be blocking your tracking, and some people are going to you may have scenarios like race condition technical code scenarios where somebody loads a page and then they load another page so quickly that none of your tools register fast enough to track that activity. So the truth is that it's technically acceptable to underreport actuality by a few percentage points. It's usually 5, 6, 7, 10%. Sometimes if you're in the EU or something and you've got an audience in Germany and those guys are blocking tracking way more aggressively than other places, then you may be a little different. But generally, United States, Canada, 5 to 10% underreporting actuality. Then there's the technically unacceptable things. So the unacceptable things are like, and then let's hit one other thing in the technically acceptable inaccuracy category. That is, the way you count people is based on in the web, at least, and in mobile, is based on unique identifiers or cookies. And if somebody resets cookies or unique identifiers, then those are only an approximation of people. So if you have a bunch of, for whatever reason, if your audience is on like a library, a campus library system or something, then you're going to have a hard time keeping track of cookies potentially, and vice versa. If you have a bunch of people that are in super secure sort of scenario behind firewalls and not persisting any information on their machines, then you might be overcounting users based on that approximation. But those are sort of like, you're not going to solve those problems. So those are technically inaccurate but acceptable. Then there's the technically unacceptable inaccuracy, and that's things like if you start to over-report reality, that means that you're just tracking incorrectly. So if your visitor counts are higher than actual visitor counts, if your transaction counts in web analytics or in ads platform are higher than the actual number of dollars you're actually bringing in through your website or the actual number of leads, then those are inaccuracies that are unacceptable. Those just mean you've set up your tracking wrong.
So I want to push on that just for a second to make sure that we're clear.
Yeah.
So if you're reporting more money earned in your analytics platform for however you've got that set up, then is actually in your bank, then you have a reporting issue.
Yeah.
If it's the other way around, depending on the margin, threshold, then it could be okay.
Yeah.
And so you're just trying to get within the acceptable range.
Yeah.
Are there, like, if we were in front of 1,000 people right now and we were giving some advice, would you give them advice on acceptable ranges of some of these things?
Yeah, I think that is like ideal is like 5%. And that 5% underreporting. So if you're the margin of your count in your platform, whether that's ads platform or analytics, web analytics, Google Analytics or something, is 5% underneath what's actual, then you can't really ask for much more than that. Now, sometimes 10% is the best you can get based on your industry or based on your geo or something. So it's kind of in that range.
We had someone that we were on the phone with a while ago that sold, their website was math games, and all of their users were using public computers at the school, and so their ability to kind of effectively identify unique users when there's no logging in, there's no cache, just is clearing things out after every 30 kids that go through the lab, then you're kind of in that position of a little bit of darkness on that.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of industry specificity in terms of what you should accept. Generally speaking, 5% should be your goal target. But I think that if you're in the marketing seat, don't sit down with the expectation that you're going to get Google Ads to line up 100% with what's in Google Analytics. It's more about setting the accurate threshold and then monitoring that discrepancy.
That's an important, you just hit on something important, because system to system variation, I was thinking about system compared to reality is like a 5% margin. But then there's like system to system. So web analytics versus Google, or like Google Analytics versus Google Ads, or Google Analytics versus Facebook, or Google Ads versus Facebook, those sort of things. There's a level or an area of technically acceptable inaccuracy or just discrepancy. Maybe not inaccuracy, but it's just due to attribution model stuff. Like Google Ads counts a conversion based on the last ad click or a view through of an ad. And Google Analytics counts it only based on something that generated a web session, and it considers multiple channels. So those are different in the way that they're going to count transactions. And so they should have there's a match to one another that needs to be a threshold that you need to consider. But there's also a threshold of any one system to like reality, the source of your business source of truth.
And I get the sense that it's a little bit of art and science when you get that there, where you say there's sort of the technical things of, okay, Google's attribution model is going to do this and Facebook's is going to do that. And ultimately, as a marketer, you want to know what your influence of your dollars is having on those different platforms. And so the art part of it is sort of a little bit subjective and strategizing around what you're going to shoot for within the conversion costs on these different platforms and kind of reconciling that within your own analytics reporting.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought about it. And I think also what you're hoping more than anything is you don't want 100% accuracy, but you do want close to 100% consistency. What you want is to have that be within that accuracy threshold that determined based on your geo and your industry and the type of campaigns or systems you're using or whatever. You have a threshold there, and then what you want to be is consistently in that threshold. You don't want to be like way out of that threshold one week and then in it the next week, because then you're going between the zones of technically acceptable inaccuracy to technically unacceptable inaccuracy, and now you're making decisions based on the technically unacceptable. But if it's always just consistently off, then your judgments can say, if you know, like, hey, we're at 5% underreporting reality all the time, then you can just go, we just add 5% to the numerator of our ROAS calculation, or the numerator of our cost per, the denominator of our cost per lead, or whatever it is.
So walk me through a little bit the difficult nature of, a marketer being tasked with deploying the accuracy and like being responsible for the accuracy of this. Because we've talked about some things that I am only familiar with because I sit in here with everybody else, but were never part of my marketing coming up party of like learning how to do these different things. QAing all this stuff was not on that list. So tell me about like what are some of the challenges?
Yeah, what makes it hard? So let's first thing that makes it hard is knowing just what is technically acceptable and what's technically unacceptable. So we just covered that, but that's the very first thing, because sometimes people come in with expectations that are like, it needs to match cent for cent. It's like, wow, you're not going to get there. The second thing that makes it hard is the technically unacceptable things. And that's, you got to know the ways that things break in order to prevent them from breaking. So, or in order to diagnose them when they are broken. So that's hard because you got to know that. And I think it's important to think a little bit about how we go about setting things up, setting up tracking, setting up data collection in the marketing world, and maybe even how that compares a little bit to other industries or other practices that deal with data collection. When we collect data, most of the time what happens is we go, what is a conversion? We go through the process of thinking about that as a marketing team. We decide what it is, and the first time we set it up, we go, all right, great. We've our conversion. Let's say we're generating leads, so somebody fills out a form on our site or something. That's the definition of conversion. We set it up and we QA it at that point. But if we're doing our jobs as marketers, we're also changing the way that we're interacting with our audience. We're probably changing what those forms look like. We're probably changing the user experience or the targeting or whatever. And so that setup is probably going to change over time. And one of the tricky things is making sure that conversion tracking stays, or that data collection in general stays consistent when we're changing the things that we're tracking or the way that we're influencing visitors. So that's a big deal. And when we think about the changes, this is, in the marketing world, there's a lot of chefs in this kitchen, right? If we're talking about a website, there's marketing teams who are probably making edits in a content management system that are making changes. There's maybe dev teams who are executing changes for like layout of site overall, things like that. There may even be using plug-in tools like a Marketo or a form stack or something to like inject a form into your site, so you may not even make changes in your content management system or in your site, but you make a change in your form handling tool or something. If we keep going down this lead generation process, that could change. And those things might change without the person who's responsible for conversion tracking ever even knowing it. So oftentimes in teams, it's like you've got 10 people or 5 or 7 people that are making changes that could affect data collection, but they're not making them in a synchronized way. So
you mean my analytics doesn't just automatically know that I've made these changes?
Wouldn't it be amazing if it did? And this is it's interesting to think about this because this is a little different. So there's a couple like things that are worth drawing some parallels to. So it's worth looking at the engineering, like the software engineering world, because software engineering deals with a lot of data collection and a lot of user experience creation, and they have really low tolerances for errors in those user experiences. You know, if a website's down 1% of the time, like that's a huge deal. If your analytics collection is technically inaccurate 1% of the time, like if you got screwed up stuff, most people are like, oh yeah, we're great. and so there's differences, but one of the things that teams do, that have really, really low tolerance for error there, or really high expectations, is they have really disciplined deployment and testing processes. Oftentimes a software team, and this is so for those that have worked on software teams or with them, then maybe this is preaching to the choir a little bit, but software teams usually have, if they're executing well, they usually have all of their code. If there's 4 or 5 people on the team that are making changes to the code, all that code is stored in a central place called a repository underneath version control. Things like GitHub might be something used for this if you've heard that term. So anytime anybody makes a change, it goes into this central repository of code, and it can't make it to production without being rationalized with other people's changes. So if I change a color and you change a color and it's the same thing at the same time, we can't let that code get to the production environment without us going, which is the right color. So, and then oftentimes we're using a staging environment where that doesn't even happen at production. That has to happen at like this agreed upon pre-production stage. And every time we deploy, so good, that's good version control. And then every time we deploy changes in code, we also write tests to say, when somebody clicks this button, then this product gets added to their cart. So we write a little test that says, confirm that is the case. And when we deploy code, then every time we deploy code, all of our tests run around everything that we've ever built. So we know, hey, if I deployed something, if I change the add to cart button somehow, and the product doesn't get added to cart, but all I thought I was doing when I changed the add to cart button was like making sure that we redirected to the cart after we added to cart, but that breaks something somehow, then I can't actually get that code into the central repository until I pass the test of add to cart button turns into product in cart. So when you compare that sort of like deployment process to like, I don't know, we just willy-nilly slap a new conversion on the page and then go off and never think about it again, you can go, well, no wonder we have data inconsistencies compared to some of those other practices. So the point is that one of the things when you think about correcting that, it's like, well, there's a lot of people who've solved these problems before. It's adopting some of those tools and practices, that sort of stuff that helps us make sure we get technically unacceptable inaccuracy out the building.
It seems pretty obvious, but let's touch on it briefly. The risks of not getting this kind of thing figured out.
Well, you've probably seen as many of these as I've seen, but some of the ones that come to mind for me are like, if you don't, the obvious one is like, if the data is technically unacceptably inaccurate, then you're just making decisions on sand, it's moving underneath you. And I've also seen, I'm interested in what you've seen, but I've seen teams that have been burned by that a few times, and the data's mostly pretty good, but they're like, we don't trust it, so we don't use it. And so even if it is accurate, then it's like, well, we're just going on gut feel because it's never right anyway. Yeah. They've been burned.
Yeah, and there's definitely a social component to it as well when you're reporting to other teams, or like, rarely is marketing on an island not involved in not being accountable for the money that they're being given. Yeah. And when you're constantly having to like backtrack or, verbally filter your reporting every time you're talking about stuff, it just creates a sort of a black eye that's hard to get rid of.
Well, and it's tough. This is an interesting thought because some marketers, you can imagine going to a meeting and not being able as a marketer to definitively and confidently say, listen, we're going to be within 5%. 5%'s okay. Like if we're off 5%, we're all good. Everybody here know that like marketing's going to be off 5%, and that's okay. If you show up to a meeting to where tech is there and tech goes, you guys are off by 5%. You got to have something wrong. And you don't know, you don't show up ready to have that conversation. Tech goes like, that's totally unacceptable. Your data's screwed. You guys don't know anything.
Yeah. You put yourself in a position where you're on your heels. Right. If you don't understand some of the basic components of this and level set with everybody. Yep. And then by being on your heels because you didn't go to data management 101 during your marketing during your degree, it sort of makes it look like you don't know what you're doing, and it begins to unravel from there. And if you've got very definitive tech people that are talking in absolutes, and accounting people that are talking in absolutes, and marketing people that are talking in like GA this and Facebook that, like you're on real shaky ground.
Yeah, it's hard to collaborate at that level, especially when they don't know what to expect of you. If you don't know what to expect of your own data sets.
All right, so let's flip the coin on that and talk about what success looks like. So when you're running a successful data accuracy operation as a marketer, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think we've hit this a little bit, but just in summary, it's like if you're consistently within 5 to 10% of reality and it's underreporting, it's not over-reporting reality, then you're pretty good. You can't expect to get a whole lot better than that. And if you are consistent over time, so as you deploy new tracking or new marketing experiences, that you remain consistent in that way. So if you have a QA process, if there's some way that you can verify that as you make changes, that your data collection stays at that level of consistency, there's success.
Yeah. I would tack on to that, and this is something anybody can do, is just understand the differences. Again, I go back to the conversion counts because I think that's like the hottest button issue that marketing teams face.
Yeah, sure.
Understand the nuance between last click and time decay and view through and 30-day windows and all that kind of stuff, so that you yourself, like, you can't outsource that understanding to someone else, because it's going to affect how you lens the discussion, how you dictate the narrative around these discrepancies that are going to exist between Facebook and Google Ads and LinkedIn and all this other stuff. And so you need to be familiar with that.
For sure.
in order to be successful, so that you can own that conversation with your team and colleagues.
And I think that and maybe to tack on one other thing. So it's being accurate and having an understanding of acceptable discrepancies and being able to describe and defend that in the scenarios that it needs to be. And then it's and the result of that, and I think this is the feeling that comes with success, is like just trust. We just know we're not spending our time worrying about whether this is right. We don't pull up a report and dread like, oh, I'm going to make a judgment here. I'm going to report a number, but I'm pretty sure it's wrong. Like that feeling is not success. The reverse of that is.
So there's a two-part question here. So first one is, what kind of skills would you need if you were trying to solve these issues in-house? Whether you have a dedicated person to this or someone that you have needs to know how to do what, like give me some of the samplings of the skill sets that you'd need in order to be successful here.
I think that maybe we can spend a second and talk about what we actually do and then what skill sets are required for those things. So we help by defining the processes to deploy new tracking. So it's like if you can get a good process around data collection, then there's a likelihood that you have a higher likelihood that you have data accuracy. And then if you have a good process around QA, so when you make changes, you know what to test. Or even better, if you're working with us, we have tools that do this, automated testing that as you deploy new changes or as we check the site every single day to make sure that we're tracking the same sorts of things consistently. And then when there is an issue, you got to know how to diagnose it. You kind of have to know, it's kind of like a doctor in that sense that like somebody just comes in and says their knee hurts. It's like, you kind of got to know what things could be hurting a knee. And so those are how we help. We've dealt with all of the inaccuracy problems that there are. And so we know the things to check for. We call them data smells. Code people call them the code smells, but we like know what are the symptoms to look for that tell us there's something wrong. Things like, we got bounce rates that are dead zero, or we got bounce rates that are 100%, or we show transaction IDs on the same one transaction ID shows up on a bunch of different days. Like, you're probably duplicating transactions and you probably got some weird tracking. Conversions outside those tolerance thresholds, or clicks in a platform, like clicks in Google Ads on a campaign compared to the number of sessions you record. If those numbers don't line up really tightly, then it's likely you got problems. So we know we got a list of 100 or so things that fit in this category of smell. And it's like, you just got to check for that stuff. Then the skills are, it's the skills that we have here in-house. So we have data architects that do solution design. We have analytics engineers that do the data collection. We have data engineers that do the data aggregation, and visualization engineers, and then analysts that do are responsible for building the reports and then looking at those things to make sure that we can generate business insights from them.
Second part to that question is, someone reaches out, they are gonna, their biggest concern is data accuracy, and they're on the phone with you and you're talking to them about all these different things. Give me some examples of like stuff that would be on a potential roadmap for them, like the ways that we would be specifically helping get more accurate data and develop a proper analytics process.
So sometimes it depends on the flavor of, somebody's concerns. Sometimes people come in and go like, I know there's this problem explicitly. I know that our conversions, like our transactions, don't match in these two systems. And so that starts with like, let's just start diagnosing. We can find out why that is. And sometimes it's like, I don't know exactly what's wrong, but I got this general unease. And so in that case, it's like, well, let's go through the whole list of stuff. Let's put to bed all of the most likely problematic areas. So you can go, okay, we can sleep well because we've covered all of the typical areas of concern. And that would be something like, let's do a generic audit or something. And then if we find things, then it's remediation. You just go in and fix the things that you find.
So if somebody doesn't have those skill sets in-house, then it's probably worth reaching out to see if we might.
Totally. Yeah, we'd love to see if we could help.
Inaccurate data is the worst, and it sounds like the easiest way to get rid of it is to